Welcome, everyone, and thanks for tuning in. What I'm sure is going to be a very exciting conversation with the CEO and president of Washingtonian Media, Cathy Merrill, who graduated Cornell in 1991. For those of you who don't know me, I'm your host, Zach Schulman. I also went to Cornell, class of 87, and then law school class of 90. And I currently direct the entrepreneurship program for Cornell, which happens to be called Entrepreneurship at Cornell. This monthly series is a partnership that we have with the Cornell Entrepreneur Network. We did start this as soon as we were all kicked off campus in March and everything went online. By the way, I've been on campus once in 6 months, which is interesting, but I do have permission to go back, which is why I'm getting tested weekly, for those of you that may have heard me say that. And anyway, our goal with these webinars is to bring alumni who are successful entrepreneurs straight into your device so that we can hear their stories and ask them questions. And by the way, we will be taking audience questions today. Please put those in the chat box as opposed to Q&A. Makes it a little bit easier for me. Some of you submitted questions in advance, and I'll be going through some of those as well. So today we are thrilled, particularly as we're getting closer to the election, to bring you Cathy Merrill, straight out of DC. She is apparently living on the same block as Barack Obama, or in the same neighborhood, and some of the Trumps as well. So we'll keep it very nonpartisan. She is a mastermind behind the wildly popular lifestyle brand called Washingtonian Media, and in particular, Washingtonian Magazine. So recent Washingtonian headlines have included things like 2020 vice presidential debate drinking game, that's important. Lifestyles of the rich in quarantine, which is also important. So basically, her and in the magazine are keeping things hopefully a little bit light in this very otherwise stressful time for all of us. We'll dive back in to what makes the lifestyle brand tick and how to put up your own signature on a family business, and also getting Catherine's advice on what it's like to operate in a tough town like DC. So before we get started, just a couple of quick housekeeping items. You can learn more about Cornell Entrepreneur Network and Entrepreneurship at Cornell by going to our websites. Those will pop up in the chat in just a bit. Our format, like I mentioned today, will be Q&A. I'll be asking a bunch of questions at the beginning to kick things off, and then I will turn toward your questions. So please don't be shy. And again, like I mentioned earlier, please put those in the chat box, and do me a favor when you do that. Put them to all panelists and attendees so everybody can see them. That'll make it a lot easier. We will have this webinar on our website and also on the CEN website in a few days. So in case you want to pass the link around to someone else, you can definitely find it there. Okay, so I am delighted to welcome Catherine, or as I'll call her, Cathy, to our show. Cathy, welcome. It's great.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So what I'm going to do is start off with a couple of my own questions, like I mentioned, then I'll kick it back to the audience a little, in just a little while. So I like to start these interviews off typically with a kind of a brief career path journey. It kind of helps level set things for me and also for the audience. So you graduated in 91, you got a degree in government and history from the Arts and Sciences College, obviously. And then you got your master's in public administration from the London School of Economics in 1995. So there's a 3-year gap in that time. I'm wondering what you did in those 3 years.
Well, I think sort of typical of a government history major who heads to Washington, D.C., I got a job at a think tank, and I worked there for a year, and then on policy, and then I hopped over to a presidential campaign, which was really exciting. And I got asked at that, I had been accepted to LSE, and I was asked to defer for a year, and then I sort of took a crazy sharp left-hand turn and moved to New York and worked for Estee Lauder for a year in international marketing. And it really changed my life. It was I think knowing what you don't want to do is just as important as knowing what you want to do. And I loved Estee Lauder. It's a terrific, terrific company. I mean, it's an amazing conglomerate, a $6 billion company if you don't know it. But I found myself very, I wasn't really into marketing, makeup and skincare, but what I really loved was the finances behind it. So I hung out
Interesting.
with the finance team and they taught me a precursor to Excel called Lotus 123, which I thought was pretty
Yep.
fascinating. And that, ignited some business sense in me.
Well, it's also interesting because, I mean, now you obviously do care about brand a lot. And Estee Lauder is a big brand. So maybe you got some brand nuggets out of that experience as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Without a question, protecting your brand, making sure your brand represents what you want it to represent, and paying attention to every detail matters. And I really learned that there.
Yeah. Interesting. And then after London School of Economics, you found yourself in what I would call top level consulting for almost 7 years. Was that something that you had considered, or did you discover that career path while you were in London?
When I came out of London, I had been following this policy track, and as I said, Estee Lauder really made me want to take a turn into business. So I applied to top consulting firms. I did not do well because case interviews are really hard. And they're still hard, but they were especially hard then because there was no internet, so you couldn't really look up how to do a case interview.
Interesting.
And there was a sort of a way of thinking. And one of the firms I applied to, which is now Oliver Wyman in DC, was at the time was pretty hardcore. It still is a quant firm. And I did okay, I mean, barely okay on one or two interviews, and they offered me a job as an administrative assistant. And I took it. I was making $22,000 a year. I had a graduate degree. I graduated from Cornell, LSE. I had 3 years of experience. The people coming straight out of college were making $42,000 a year. And I just stuck it out and said, I'm gonna just try to learn. I spent my first 3 or 4 months binding documents. Like, that's what I did all day. Like, I bound documents. I'm really good at binding documents, Zach. If you need anything bound, I can do it. And I would go around to people and say, is there anything I can help you with? And some senior partners had extra work, as they always do. And that sort of launched my career. And I made partner very quickly there and traveled the world and learned a hell of a lot.
Yeah. It's funny, I'm looking at the chat box. Someone wrote, love the Lotus 123 reference. How about VisiCalc?
Oh, yes. I did not. I know what VisiCalc is. I mean, I remember it vaguely, but I didn't use it, no.
Okay, so then after consulting, you then ended up at ACS, which, as I understand it, is a firm which has the software and apparatus to collect a vast majority of the nation's highway tolls, like all the Easy Pass stuff that I use up here in upstate New York, et cetera. Was ACS one of your consulting clients?
No, they weren't a client at all. I had a lot of, big clients in consulting, from Sprint to, I did a lot in the telecom world, Philips, places all over. They were, and I think this happens to a lot of people, they were a place growing really quickly. They were big when I got there. There were about 55,000 people. They've been bought several times, but they're a large state and local government contractor. They run, besides transportation, a lot of things. Court, when you get picked for jury duty and you only get picked, one trial, they run the systems behind that. Collecting child care checks from people. It's a huge operation.
Right.
They were a few blocks down and they were hiring, and someone said you should go talk to them. And I talked to their COO. It was about a $2 billion division that he ran, and he had some big sort of problems, things he wanted to study, including weirdly weigh stations. If you guys if you see big trucks that have to get pulled over and weighed, they run most of that.
Yeah.
And he convinced me to come work there. I did some projects for him, but I really, really wanted some true P&L experience. One of the things in consulting you have these incredible teams of super smart people. And this is same in investment banking too, where you work, I went, I think 3 years without a vacation. I wouldn't recommend that to anybody, but you work really, really hard and you learn a lot, but it's not quite the same as, really being in charge of revenue and costs, because, you're being paid to do an assignment. So I asked him, I kept begging him every day, like, put me in charge of something I can own. And he did. And those were some easy pass contracts that grew. And it was a real learning experience to work and manage people who, most of the people I managed didn't have college degrees. Most of them had GEDs. And I learned a lot. My boss was a guy, Michael Werda, who went on to run the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration. And so it was, a very technical and fun job.
Right. Well, it's interesting. So this just proves your point that you made much earlier. Well, not much, but earlier today, about really loving the finance aspects. So you really wanted that P&L experience, and you certainly got it. And obviously, it's clearly helped you with your current job, which is running this magazine. So let's actually take this jump. So you can probably see where I'm headed with all these questions. You went from, having fun at Estee Lauder to consulting to toll collecting. That's a joke. To the family.
By the way, I have worked the Delaware Memorial Bridge toll collecting, so it's not a joke. I have spent a day in there collecting tolls. Also, if a lot of Cornellians are from New Jersey, if you've been through exit 1, which is the only exit on the Jersey Turnpike that you can drive through without stopping. It was the first one under my watch that was built as a construction site, so I walked it many times as a construction site. We did, the most of Easy Pass plus Sun Pass in Florida, and I'm forgetting the name of it now, but in California, what the passes out there, Sun Pass, Golden Gate passes. So I have literally collected.
So you have done toll collecting. So consulting to toll collecting,
yes.
And now to the family business of magazine publishing. And that's a pretty interesting leap. And I'll just state that as a fact, right? Because it's interesting.
Yeah.
And I'm going to go into this next question. So you've been at the helm of the Washingtonian for about 13 years now. And I understand it was founded in 1965 by a former CIA operative. I just love saying that phrase. I just think it's spook or something. At a time when the city magazines were just beginning to be a serious trend. And I'm sure you'll talk about city magazines when you answer this. And your dad purchased the magazine in 1978 to add to a stable of other newspapers and magazines that he already owned. And then your dad passed away in 2006. And that's when you ended up taking over the magazine. You managed to sell the other parts of the stable. You kept Washingtonian, and now you're the president and CEO. And it's just it's a very interesting jump. I'm curious, it clearly defines your professional career now. People know you for this. They probably don't know you for toll collecting, right?
No, they don't.
They certainly know you for this. So I would really love to understand a little bit about your family's history with the magazine and why it was you who took it over, and was it an obligation? Did it just feel right? I'm really curious as to how this happened.
Well, you got the history right, and it to give a little more flavor on it. It actually ties back to Cornell. My father went to Cornell on a merit scholarship. My grandparents were all immigrants, and he was managing editor of the Cornell Daily Sun, and he loved that. And he, after Cornell, got jobs in journalism in New York City, where he met my mom, and who came from extremely modest means. Her father was a coal miner in Scranton, so we have some Scranton roots. They moved to Washington to get jobs in the State Department, and then my mom worked on the Hill. They wanted to serve their country, so they moved down there. But my father really missed the Cornell Daily Sun, and there was a little newspaper in Annapolis, and he thought, wow, this is a great town, a great place. I love it. Wouldn't it be fun to run this newspaper? But they were, on 2 government salaries. And so he kept following it, and it came for sale, and he borrowed money from really from his Cornell friends. And I know some entrepreneurship class will talk a little bit about leverage and money, which was, then there was a few newspapers there. This was in '69. They were for sale for $3.4 million. He borrowed $80,000. I think 20 plus thousand of that came from Cornell classmates. And with that 80,000, he just leveraged up borrowing money from banks, and he bought $3.4 million in assets
Wow.
with $80,000 in cash.
That, I mean, that, by the way, that's much more leverage than normal private equity. I'm just
It's
letting
very,
you know.
very leveraged. And by the way, when it succeeds, it's great. When it fails, not so great. He succeeded
Right.
with, he succeeded a bunch of lawsuits. The newspapers were losing a lot of money. And obviously you have to make a profit the first year to pay your interest payments, or it doesn't work. I recently found a note from I guess his old accountant's wife, who I was born during this time, who drove my mom home from the hospital with me because he couldn't take the day off work to drive me home. So she did, but that was good because he needed to work every day. Anyway, so that launched him into both a journalism and a business trajectory. He then bought Baltimore Magazine, which we later sold, and then Washingtonian, and then spent time serving in government. He went in and out of government, and my mom would take over the company. So it was sort of an interesting family to grow up in, because they switched jobs, and it's an intersection, Washington is a great place, but also an intersection of business, of journalism, and of government.
Yeah. Could you do me a favor? I hate to interrupt. Just tell us a little bit about your dad's positions in government, because I know they're quite senior, and I think it'll be good for the audience to hear that, to give it.
Yeah,
some
they were.
perspective.
Yes, he served in 7 administrations, going back quite a ways. But he was a senior counselor at the Pentagon. When I was in college, he ran NATO. He was Assistant Secretary General of NATO. That's the #2 position in NATO. The top position, Secretary General, cannot be an American under the treaty. The #2 is always an American. And so that is sort of the key position there. They lived in Belgium. My sister, also Cornellian, went to high school there. I was at Cornell at the time. He was chairman of the Export-Import Bank, and then served on many boards, both Defense Policy Board and a lot of nonprofit boards and business boards as well. But yes, he would go in and out of government.
Yep, interesting. Okay, so now bring it back. So your dad passes away. Your mom is still alive then, or not?
My mom was still alive,
Okay.
but was not, she was not really active at that point in the business. And, this was 2006. He passed away. I had a 2-day-old, so it was a challenging, it was a very challenging time. But we had, we had great partners. We had great support. We sold the newspapers. Even by 2006, newspapers, I could see were struggling, and a problem to, reinvent that business model. Washington, I knew well. I knew the magazine well, and I wanted to run it. I thought it would be interesting and fun. I didn't know if it would succeed. My brother and sister, I have an older brother, also a Cornellian. He's an engineer. My sister's an environmentalist. They've been extremely supportive, and still are. Although I told them, they got the thing for this. I said, don't be on it, because then you'll question. We were talking yesterday. Anything I say, you can come in and correct. But so hopefully they're not on. They've been absolutely just terrific and supportive. And we talked about it as a family. I mean, the real key here in family businesses is open communication. And so we, I think, are a fairly philanthropic family. We like to help the communities we live in, because we've been so blessed. And we spend every Thanksgiving, we have a meeting and talk about family things and where we can help and philanthropy. And we would talk in those meetings about, would Cathy one day be a fit here? And so
And so did you go, were you at ACS when you're?
I was at ACS. It was 2 blocks from Washingtonian. I literally put everything in my cardboard box and physically walked over to Washingtonian 2 blocks away.
So you were, I mean, not to turn this terrible situation with your dad dying, but you had a baby, like literally a 2-day-old baby. And I take it you never went back to ACS? Like you were on maternity leave and you never went back, or how did that work?
So I was absolutely on maternity leave.
Yeah.
And when I came back from maternity leave, I did go back for a few months to finish up some projects.
Okay.
And sort of the complication of selling the newspapers and getting the magazine. There was a lot of legal, tax, legal business stuff that went on in those transactions because you were selling part of a bigger company and keeping part of a bigger company. So I kind of did that on the side while I worked at ACS. And then when that transaction was complete, I moved over.
Okay.
Then I carried my box.
Well, I guess that was convenient.
It was very convenient.
if nothing else. So you mentioned already for us your dad's career in politics and how he served under multiple presidents. Did that influence the Washingtonian's direction and its longevity?
So I would say this, that the thing about it, yes, is the answer. But the thing about all city and regional magazines, people hear from all over, and there's city and regional magazines all over the country, is that what makes them really good is them knowing and understanding their community. And every community has a different flavor. And, I get most of the city and regional magazines in the country, so I see them. So if you get 5280 at Denver, that's their city and regional magazine, it's going to be very outdoorsy. It's going to have sort of a more rough and rugged sense. If you get Palm Springs Life, it's going to have a art 1960s sense. And it's knowing and understanding the people in the community. So my dad, it was really helpful. All communities have circles. They have business circles, they have education circles, they have charity circles, people who operate in these, giant Venn diagram. Washington happens to be more complicated than most because we have the federal government, we have 2 state governments, we have a local DC government. We also have national businesses like Hilton and Marriott and Lockheed Martin that are here. Plus we have local businesses like restaurants and everything else. And so, and policy and politics. So his ability to work in different circles and know people in different circles helps the magazine to do what we do best, which is to reflect our community.
Okay. So kind of keeping it, I don't want to say niche because
it is niche. That is the key.
Okay. So in your view, the magazine's success is because it's niche and focused. It's niche and focused, yeah.
Absolutely. And we aim, we are we are niche. We aim at the top 10% of the community. 99% of our readers are college educated. 50% of our readers have a graduate degree.
Wow.
They're high net worth. Their net worths are close to 2 million. I think they're over 2 million now dollars in the last survey. And we don't go after that top 1%. Like you see some of the super glossies that, the women who spend $5,000 or $6,000 on a handbag. That's not us. We're about smart, educated, but well off. And those 2 things are tied.
Right. So there's a question that came in the chat box, which you've kind of just answered, but I just want to ask it anyway. So it says, I helped launch my magazine 5 years ago. We're struggling to build brand when we live in a world where most people don't even know magazines still exist. We seem to be going straight uphill. What would you do if you were launching a publication at this juncture instead of tweaking a well-established brand like Washingtonian that still benefits from robust advertiser support?
So it's a really good question because we do have 55 years of brand to build on and to trust to build on. And in any business, brand is key and building it is key. But the answer would be to be relentless about helping your readers. So, magazines like ours, and that's what I say are niche, really are about service journalism. So where to eat, where to go on day hikes, what to do, and provide people help. That's the same, by the way. Ours happens to be location niche, but I was on a panel once with a guy from a knitting magazine, and they have a really big online presence. He has 5 magazines. One of them is on knitting socks. I didn't even know knitting socks was a whole little niche on knitting socks, which I really wanted to ask him how do knitted socks stay up, because I would think they would just fall down, but I don't know anything about knitting. But clearly, what he provided, the same thing, is really, really helpful to people. And so some of the national magazines, which tend to be broad, really are suffering. But if you're a wooden boat maker, people who love wooden boats love reading about how you refinish something, how you do something. So giving people something in their market that they want and need and provides them information is the key to building a brand.
Okay. I think that completely answers the question, which is great. There was a related one that said, if you were starting over today with just an online magazine, what would your top marketing and top hiring priorities be? And I think it's probably you could probably share your online statistics with us because they're pretty robust. So
yeah, I don't think it would be. I don't think it would be. I don't think it would be any different. We have over 2 million uniques a month. Actually, it's about 2.5 million unique people a month come to our website. We have just under 700,000 social media followers. So our web does extremely well. Our engagement, which is also a key that people don't really look at, they tend to look at impressions and uniques, but engagement, how many people hit that little, heart or the like button in Facebook or retweet you keeps growing and growing and growing. And so you still have to provide great content. So you need great journalists who write things that people want to read. Some people can make a living off of just clickbait stories. Daily Mail is fantastic at that. But most people need real content to have people come back and back and back. So you need good journalists and you need good salespeople. But people still love, the magazine has 400,000 readers a month. People love getting it. Anthony Fauci loves it. He posed on our last cover saying, wear a mask, and did an interview. He's a super fan.
And I hope by now that everyone on the webinar knows that Dr. Fauci is also a Cornellian.
Yes, he's also. By the way, I've known him for years, and I didn't know that until the Cornell thing came out. So Cornell, I don't think has done a good job with that, but now people know.
I really loved his last Godfather comment when he was zinging back at President Trump.
Yeah,
it was funny. We can get to that later. Okay, so let's go back to some other questions. I can go back to my list here. So for the magazine, I think maybe you've already answered this, by the way, but is it the magazine that Washington lives by?
It is, because of that service journalism.
Yeah,
it is. We do 2 things, and they haven't changed in 60 years. And that surprises people, even though I've added multiple magazines besides Washingtonian. We have a weddings magazine, and we have a visitor's guide. And, we've had some magazines we've launched that have failed, and we do events are a big portion of our business now. Prior to the pandemic, we run, 30, 40, 50 events a year. Even now we're doing Zoom events. But the two principles, that are sponsored and people want to reach an audience. So, this is our top doctors list. We will pull the doctors together for a Zoom event, and actually Fauci's going to speak to them.
And are these events just for your subscribers?
It depends. Some of them are open to the public and we re-air. Some of them are limited to you have to be on this list. Some of them are small groups of people in Washington that we pull together for a discussion on a subject. And, we go from there. I see the dog.
Yeah.
Violet, come on. Sorry. the uh, uh, but what I was going to say, the two things that we've always been about is how to get the most out of living in Washington. What are the best restaurants or the cheap eats, where to hike, where to go. All those best lists that you see is how to maximize living in our community for the people who live here.
Is there competition? Do you have competition?
We certainly, lots of competition. I will say the pandemic is really doing a great job taking away a lot of our competition, which is, a sad thing, but a good thing.
Yeah.
And the second thing we're about is explaining to people how our city works. So for the guy that asked the other question about his brand, it's the same thing no matter where you are. So how your town works can be fun things like, today, the debate drinking game, because, in DC, that is, especially, but it's gotten picked up everywhere, kind of fun buzzwords that people are talking about. But profiles, whether that's a profile of David Rubenstein or, a scandal that's happening in our community, that gives people a sense of what goes on in each of those circles. So those two things, how you get the best out of living here, how our town works. That's what we're about. And no
Gotcha.
matter the platform, it doesn't change.
Gotcha. Now I think this next question, I think the answer you're going to give must be no, based on what you've told us already about your own magazine. But do you think that the age of print is over?
I think for some things it is over. First of all, if I believed print, if I believed everyone had told me that print was over, then I would have closed shop 14 years ago.
Right.
And my father would have closed shop before that. Because in 2000, print is dead, print is dead, print is dead. And we've been profitable every year. So I do not believe print is dead. I think magazines are a very unique category that because of the beauty, the visual, the finding something that you don't know that you're going to find. The web, you kind of go down a rabbit hole, but this kind of open and long form reading, people like the beauty of giant pictures. That's why Instagram is so popular. But then when it's bigger and, brighter, I think people will continue to read magazines.
Whether it's at the doctor's office or their living room, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to look up at my other screen so I can read a question that came in advance. So for those online, when you see me looking up, it's not that I'm distracted. I'm just looking at my other screen. So here's one. It says, your father was the editor of the Cornell Daily Sun, as you already pointed out. At that time, the Sun published a print edition 5 days a week. There was no such thing as online, obviously. In the paper, which was and still is a for-profit company, independent of the university, was hugely profitable. By the way, a lot of people don't know that. They think it's part of Cornell. It truly is not part of Cornell. It's just.
I think what people don't understand is most college newspapers are controlled by the college. It's more like the Chronicle at Cornell.
Yeah.
The Chronicle will never put in something that's super critical of the provost or the president, or if somebody's doing something wrong at Cornell, because it's controlled by Cornell.
Correct.
Where when you have a real independent newspaper, I think the Yale Daily Sun is, I know I'm on the board of Maryland, the Diamondback is, but there's not a ton of independent college newspapers.
Yeah, yeah. So back when your dad was there, the paper was profitable, I understand.
Oh, yeah. That's how he made his money to pay to eat.
Yeah, yeah. So today it's reversed. It's not profitable. Okay, it's mostly online. They have expanded their online readership. It publishes 3 times a week in print and runs in the red every year. This is from the an alum who I trust is right. I haven't verified this. So, and it's sustained by donations from alumni in order to keep going. So do you see a path forward for publications like The Sun, or will it be forever dependent on what I'll just call outside philanthropy?
So I don't have the answer to that. It's a challenge. I can say two things on the subject. One is that I have not seen the Sun's numbers, but I bet they're good because people always numbers in terms of readership online. And I'm not going to distinguish the print and online for a moment because I think what's important here is the audience, and people I think want to know what is going on in their community, whether that is some of the bad things that have happened at Cornell when there have been riots, or whether that's fraternities shutting down, or whether that's that crazy sex column thing that runs in the Cornell Daily Sun.
Yep.
It's very, very popular. I think the readership, people always want to know what's going on in the community. The business side of it is really hard. A lot of people have tried to roll up the various college newspapers to get advertisers in there. The problem is that audience is really much easier. I mean, very easy to reach. There's not really a barrier to reach college students because you can find them pretty easily on, if it's not TikTok, it's other places online. So that becomes the challenge. And there's ways to think through that business model, but it's difficult. And it's the same business model that's affecting College Town. So there's some
and College Town's completely changing. I mean,
yeah,
really changing. There's a ton of new development.
but here's the thing: students have never had a lot of money. Most students are on scholarship everywhere, and so you're advertising to people who don't have a lot of spending. And so when you have a publication like ours where you have high income and high net worth, people want to reach those people because well, Lexus isn't on the back of this one, but BMW or Lexus wants to reach people who will buy their product. College students don't buy a lot, so that adds another another level of difficulty. The silver lining of that is that brands know that if they can get college students hooked on things, they can become lifers. So that's why you always see Gillette and people in the beginning, because if you start off with a Gillette razor, you will probably have a Gillette razor the rest of your life.
Yeah. By the way, I did shave today with a Gillette razor. Yeah.
You probably got one free at Cornell when you started.
It's my once every few days shaving now because of COVID. It's actually kind of nice. So I have a question. This was submitted by someone else, but I'm gonna tweak it a bit. So when you took over the magazine, there was already a team there. I mean, like, obviously your dad had built a team of people to run the magazine. Was there any
private equity would buy it? If you work for a family business, I mean, some of my best friends are private equity people, but if you work for any business, your fear is that private equity or a VC will buy it. Right. I mean, not as an exit and you get paid if you have equity, but that was the fear. So I think they were really, really happy that it stayed in the family, but it's a challenge. I mean, I was 37 and I had to manage there's some people I had to manage. Some people I had to let go who, I'd literally known since I was 8 years old. And so learning to manage people that are older than you, that have been there longer than you, and often know more than you, that was very challenging and pretty scary, to be honest.
So, but they were actually happy that this happened.
Overall, yes, people were very, very happy, but there were a lot of the phrase that I wrote a little lean in for Sheryl Sandberg on this. People would say to me, well, your father would never. And I just bite my tongue and move on. And I sort of hated that. I hated when people said to me, your father wouldn't do this. And luckily I had a great relationship with my dad. And I asked him once, hey, if what happens if I take over the magazine one day and I run it into the ground? And he said, won't affect me at all. I'll be dead. Like, I don't do what you do. But I knew there's a Latin phrase, probably some Cornell person could come up with it. I don't remember it. In Latin, it's something called like morto amato, or it means hand from the grave. And he would tell us, or tell me, hey, never do the wishes of a dead person. You got to do what you think is right. If you try to follow someone in the grave, you'll fail. So I always just did what I thought was best, because I knew that his advice would be do what you think is best, even if you mess up. So that was always that your father would do this, or your father wouldn't do that, or your father, and you just sort of had to smile your way through it. And it could be a little irritating.
Interesting.
We got a question, by the way. Did you work at the Sun when you were at Cornell?
I did not work at the Sun. My sister worked at the Sun. I did not. My journalism credentials are thin. I worked for our, and it's sort of important, actually. I worked for our newspapers when I was in high school as a photojournalist. But I did not work for the Sun. I think I was too busy partying and doing other things. But it meant when I came to the magazine and we went from being part of a bigger company and we were one magazine, 12 times a year, it was like this really, really hard to make the financials work on it. And we hadn't invested in the web and we didn't have events and we didn't have other things. It meant that I spent the majority of my time with my CFO and working on selling and finances and not on the journalism side of things. That turned out to be the right decision because we
Right, I
had
was going to say
journalists.
it's probably so important because of all the turmoil that magazines have had.
Yes. And it's easy. It is fun to be part of the journalism team. And people pitch me stories all the time and I love that. And I pass it on to the team. But I don't get into the weeds of it. I have a great editor. He knows what he's doing. And we have a great team there. But early on, especially, I really focused on growing the top line and then using that to grow the bottom line. And I think had I worked for the Sun, I would have spent more time
On the journalist side.
on the journalism side.
Yeah, that's interesting. Really, really interesting.
And my consulting background helped there too, because I'm a pretty decent number cruncher.
I mean, it's so important. Every business needs numbers. I always tell students that I deal with, they're starting it, they call it a nonprofit. I'm like, that's great. How are you going to make money? It's like they still need to.
If you got to have accounting 101, period. I tell every arts and science person that, like, take a class in accounting.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to read another question from my other screen. So it says, I'm a fellow DC area resident, have been to several of your events, and I've really enjoyed them. I'm hoping you will talk about what seems to be the Washingtonian successful strategy of linking its published content with experiences as a way to drive brand awareness and to create meaningful engagement between advertisers, subscribers, and others. And then I need to add, the person writes, when I graduated in 2006, I had the good fortune to be selected as a Merrill Presidential Scholar. I'm grateful to your families, or for your family's generosity and the thoughtful way you have created links between current and future Cornell students in local communities. So,
well, congratulations on being a Presidential Scholar. That's quite an honor. That's the top half of 1% of graduates at Cornell. So that you must be pretty phenomenal. This is a bigger piece. It's a really, really good question. And this also goes back to the Sun's challenge, is that advertisers used to buy a page in the magazine, just like you buy a page in the Washington Post, and you would run it knowing you were hitting an audience. That's not how people think anymore. The advertisers that we work with, in general, especially the bigger advertisers, they're buying a campaign and they are buying a connection with an audience, of which print is part of that, an experience is part of that, social media is part of that, and online is part of that. So, Lexus wants you to see the ad that the car exists, but then when you're at an event of ours, they want to have a car there that people will get in, sit in, touch, feel, maybe get a ticket so we can drive them to their store, then remind you after the fact with a thank you email, dedicated email. Then when you're on one of our social followings, you might see something from Lexus. So you remember, oh, I sat in that car and I remember seeing the car. So people are buying a package to reach a person at very different points and different levels. And so that is how those connect. And also, speaking engagements are very big as well, because relationships always matter. And so when we have events where people can talk about their brand or relate to the people there, if you're top doctors and you are trying to, sway them to a bank or to whatever, whatever it is, that's an important component, which is why you see on a lot of panels a person representing a brand. And
Yeah.
those people can be paid for the seat, but they can also be honest brokers. You just have to make
And-
sure you're honest about how they're
Right.
represented on the panel.
Right. So you must have a chief marketing officer or something like that.
Yes.
Which is very
Yeah.
different than
And I have
sales.
a publisher who she really is terrific. She oversees the marketing and the sales. She's chief revenue officer.
Okay, interesting. What's it like working in a male-dominated field?
So journalism is not a male-dominated field. It's actually a
Aha.
female-dominated field. It's been really hard for female journalists to fight to get there, and especially on air, it has been a real barrier. We do. We give awards every year to female journalists. To get to the top percent has been really difficult for women. Andrea Mitchell told a story in an event we had that when she was a young energy reporter, 3 Mile Island happened. And they kept assigning her to the agency here in downtown Washington. She kept saying, I want to go up and report from there and report from there. And finally, her boss said, listen, you are a woman who has, we don't want you to have any radiation that could affect your uterus and your chance to have children. So we don't want to send you there. And Andrea looked at her boss and said, what about that guy's balls? Are you worried about his balls and him having radiation and not being able to have kids? And they sent her there the next day. Yeah. There was a lot of barriers for women, but now mostly in journalism schools, you see more women going in, which is great.
Okay, good. Changing tactics here for a second, or to use sailing. I guess this is appropriate. So taking a new tack. Can you talk a little bit about your family's Cornell philanthropy and what it's focused on?
I can. I think people would rather talk about Washington and the election, but I absolutely can.
I just needed a little bridge. I needed a little bridge before I go into the election. I had to get people's kind of minds clear.
My family had been supporters of Cornell for a very long time. As I said, my father went there on a scholarship. Like many people, became disconnected from Cornell, and then when my brother went into the engineering school there, and then I went in, became reconnected, ended up being on the board. So we, 30 plus years ago, he founded a Merrill Presidential Scholars. It awards, as I said, the top percent, but it's really not about that. It's about rewarding high school teachers and professors. He wanted to do something around teaching. And so that top 0.5% at Cornell, we asked them who was the teacher from wherever you're from that had the most influence on you, and who's the professor that had the most influence on you. And then we have a luncheon that honors, we fly in their teachers from everywhere. I mean, it could be a 7th grade teacher from China, we'll fly them in, Africa, all over the world, and do a teaching symposium for them. And then the professors, Charlie Williamson, who is a professor of fluid dynamics, I think he's been selected 22 times.
Wow.
The student has to pick you. So it also lets the president know who are the professors that are really driving teaching and not research.
Okay.
Because people win multiple times. Cornell Sailing Center, we grew up in Annapolis, we sail a lot hard. And then some various programs in engineering, and I'm on the Board of Arts and Sciences. So a few things, the new advisee program there. But the idea is to help the great university, but help the students and the teachers.
Great. Thank you so much for that. Okay, so that was a good kind of mind clear, so we can jump with our last 10 minutes into the election a little bit, because what a crazy time. I would just love, or I would, but I'm sure everyone would love your take on the election and like Washington under the current administration. You can be as direct as you like. I know that you are. Your magazine doesn't endorse, which obviously is probably strategic. You can talk about that a little bit. But tell us your take on the election and the administration at this point.
Well, I'll say this. I have never, ever seen Washington so united. The town is very, very united for getting Trump out of office. And that is true of all, I would say all of my conservative friends. I can't think of an exception. Some new people have come to town, obviously, that, work for Trump. And by the way, I think it's really, really important that universities provide space for conservatives to speak and for, half the country voted for Trump. So you have to have room for people to give their opinions and speak. I think we have moved beyond Republican and Democrat and conservative and liberal into a world, frankly, that is right and wrong. And so my conservative friends, I mean, from the hard right think tanks, and you look at your George Wills and your Bill Kristols and, conservative writers are all, they might not be pro-Biden, but they're all anti-Trump because and many, many people have spent their lives working on real issues here. They care. That's why they come to Washington. So when I say united, I should say minus the 535 who work on the Hill, but we're a region of 6 million people. So that's a very, very small percentage. But the people who work in administrations, hey, they want to get back to talking about Social Security, talking about healthcare, talking about the future of aviation, and having really heated discussions on two sides of any issue, not talk about tweets and what's the definition of a lie and these kinds of things. So they're frustrated that they can't get their job done. They're frustrated that there are many vacancies in all of their agencies because they can't attract talent because people don't want to, work for him. That doesn't mean you can't agree with a lot of his political policies. You might agree with Trump on a whole bunch of policies, but this isn't about that. So it's an interesting time to be in Washington because it's actually more united than I've seen it.
Interesting. So we had a comment that just came in on the chat. It says, interesting to hear that perspective on Trump, a member of the Graham family, who I do.
I know the Grahams well, yeah.
Okay, so the Washington Post, were the Washington Post, is that right?
Yep. That was Catherine Graham who ran the Post. And
okay. Said earlier this year that many of the people in their circle are Trump supporters. And the person says, I was surprised to hear that.
I can't speak to that, but I know Catherine Weymouth, which is Catherine Graham's granddaughter who ran the Post, is one of my closest friends. So we're in the same circles. Look, there's going to be Trump supporters in Washington, but long-time people who have been here, I can only speak for myself from what I hear from my friends, is a different story. Yeah. And one of the top Republican lobbyists in town lives a few doors down, and she has been working for years against this. So I don't know. I think it's nice to see. I hope for a change. I think there will be a change. I think there's some. I was on a call yesterday with some top political people, and I was sort of surprised to hear Charlie Cook was on it from the Cook Report. And he said, everyone talks about getting the last election wrong, all the pollsters missing it. Right. But he pointed out, he said, actually, when you look at the popular vote, the week of the election, I forget exact numbers, but the spread was 48 Hillary, 44 Trump. And the popular vote came in 48 Hillary, 4 or whatever it was. I mean, you have to make the math work, but 46 Trump. It was a 2-point spread. They got the popular vote right. And the Electoral College, they actually called 47 of the states right. They missed Ohio, Michigan, and Wisconsin. And so those 3 states made a big difference in who won, but they got 47 correct. And, this year the polls are way, they're not close calls so far. So if you're a Biden supporter, there is some real hope there. But if you're a Trump supporter, I guess you have to hope that, you get those little people in those swing voters in those states. But it wasn't that wrong last time around.
Gotcha. It's interesting. Very, very interesting. So tell us why your magazine does not make endorsements.
I don't know any magazines that make endorsements. And actually, most newspapers have now pulled back from making endorsements. I grew up in a town where our newspaper made a lot of endorsements. And sometimes now newspapers don't do it for the president. They do it. And I would urge everyone, if you vote in your hometown, go to your hometown newspaper and look up their endorsements for city councilmen, for register of wills, for Congress, because the newspaper there tends to know those people and know them well. And you get some real nutcases who run. That's just the truth. And so
Right.
if you vote the ticket, you could accidentally vote for a nutcase. And the newspapers tend to explain why they support people. Board of Education, who can follow all the people who runs for a Board of Education? The newspaper will explain why they picked that person.
Right.
From the president, there's enough local news sources that people can make their own decision. They don't need a newspaper to tell them kind of, here's what we think. But
Right.
you know, I don't even know what the Register of Wills does. So I need to, you know, look, I mean, in Maryland, that's a thing. I vote in the district, but,
Yeah.
you know,
So,
I would urge everyone.
we have heard of some prominent national newspapers who make endorsements. I mean, we've all read them. So, I mean, that's actually really interesting to learn that smaller ones or magazines, like there's just no need. I mean, it's kind of, I mean, I would almost say that it would be bad business perhaps. Particularly because you're dealing with a niche for a company like yours where you're dealing with a niche audience. Alienating an audience, even if you feel strongly about someone's position, probably isn't worth it from a business perspective.
I think part of it is business and part of it is, are you useful to your readers? Someone said USA just wrote in the chat that USA broke their rule not doing endorsements and endorsed Biden. And
Yeah.
I think that's smart of them, because I think that this election is not about Democrat, Republican. It's about right and wrong. And you know, if you're in a country where you have someone who's moving towards being a dictator or a fascist or whatever, you know, is going to be horrible for your country, you better stand up early and you better have that person removed, or they can wreak havoc on a country.
Yeah.
I think we're more in that situation where someone has been wreaking havoc. I guess I'm getting a little political here, but they have been
That's
wreaking
okay.
havoc. They have been wreaking havoc. And so when you endorse, there's, you know, extenuating circumstances. We are in a year of extenuating circumstances, and we're in a year where a lot of people are dying. So it matters more.
Right. Absolutely. So here's another question from the chat, which I think is interesting. It might be our last question, by the way. It's 12:59. So is there any talk in Washington around Trump not leaving office, even if he loses? Or is that
Yeah.
just all puffery?
No, there's definite talk. There is definite talk about that. And a lot of chatter about it, because this is where you just get into the weeds of, you know, who does the Secret Service roll up to? What will they do about it? The military, but I think for the most part, at least, you know, my friends have a lot of faith that that will be taken care of if he doesn't.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
most Americans follow the rule of law. Most people who go in, the vast majority of people who go into government service want to serve their country over their self. You know, I have many friends who are wealthy who say, hey, this electing Biden means more taxes for me and more taxes for my business. And that's true for me. It means more tax for me,
Right.
but I care more about the country. And I think you could see our institutions that would prevent him, if he tried to do that, the institutions would.
Right.
Over.
Right. Okay, so I'm going to read one more comment, and then I'm going to close things out. So this is also right off the chat box. It says, I just read it, so it's a great way to end. It says, "Thank you for your time, Catherine. I'm so impressed by your intelligence, clear work ethic, humility, and heart. I'm happy to have someone like you in our role, and very proud that you are a Cornellian."
Well,
So we can all shed a little tear.
That's very nice. Thank you, whoever wrote that, and thank you to Cornell. And I, you know, urge everybody to stay involved in Cornell. It's an incredible community. And I will say this: I think we forget how special it is that big red bond that we have. You know, some schools have it, and a lot of schools don't have it. And it's pretty amazing that we got to go to a school where when you meet someone who went there, you're like, oh, you went to Cornell, I went to Cornell. And then, you know, you see people at Penn and they're like, oh, you went to Penn, I went to Penn. you know? So
Very good.
yeah. So we're really, really, really fortunate and to have the amazing faculty we have. And I'm so glad and
Yeah.
happy to contribute.
Well, thank you so much. So listen, everyone, thanks so much for joining in today. As a reminder, the program will be recorded. It'll be available both on the CEN live stream channel and also the Entrepreneurship at Cornell YouTube channel. These are monthly webinars. In November, we're actually taking a break only because we have our really big Eclectic Convergence Conference, which is almost an all-day affair where we have 8 speakers, all fireside chats. So I encourage you to check that out. If you just search Cornell Eclectic Convergence, you will definitely find it. That event typically is in New York City live every year, but we're doing it online, obviously. So, and then in December, by the way, we are having a webinar with Arthur Blank, who is the Home Depot founder. His daughter is now at Cornell, and he graciously agreed to do a webinar with us in December. So we're really excited about that. So until then, keep making great things, dream big. And once this webinar ends, everyone will be turned off all at once, so it kind of closes quickly. But thank you so much. Thank you, Catherine, for joining us, and have a wonderful rest of your day.